Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Um, Big week, Bob. Big week in divisional round. Big
Big
night
week.
last night. Notre Dame imploding. But as we look at this overall, we're well ahead of statistically where we should be in terms of entries into our best balls. Well ahead in terms of still having people alive,
Got the
and
best ball.
it's a great spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
Great
good things.
spot, but despite the fact that it was
A lot of good
basically a
things.
one man, one you type league in Saquon. So that was
Yeah,
the
I
thing.
mean, I was actually shocked, Joe, and I told you this last night when we were watching the game, that it was quite a shocker for me to see people in pods that had Saquon and Gibbs, and I question how that happened in most pods. Which if people were drafting quarterbacks first, 1, 2, 3, you might have gotten
Mm-hmm.
Saquon and Gibbs to fall for you in a six potter. But in the OG 6, I was baffled at how that was a possibility. They paired him up with Jaden Daniels, and obviously, a lot of you're going to see a lot of advance rates for Jaden Daniels Saquon teams. You're going to see a lot of advance rates for Jaden Daniels Gibbs teams. And so you just kind
Mm-hmm.
of have to hope that you are getting hit on the right pod and grabbing yourself the Gibbs lineups instead of the Saquon lineups. You're going to see a lot of this week, especially you're going to see a lot of Josh Allen, as our boy Lamar Jackson faded into obscurity again within the playoffs. You're going to also see, your Jaden. You
Yeah.
might see a couple Jalen Hurts lineups if they stacked Saquon, because Jalen Hurts didn't really help you, didn't really hurt you too much. And even so, you might even see a couple of Matt Stafford led teams that will probably have a Patrick Mahomes build on it.
We're going to see a lot of dead teams.
Matt Stafford most likely advanced a couple thousand teams out there with his 23-point performance, and probably saved those Patrick Mahomes owners that were relying on Patrick Mahomes to have a big game. So if you didn't stack up another quarterback on the backside of Patrick Mahomes, you probably ate it. If you had too many Lions, you're probably faded. And it just goes to show that there's a lot of nuances that many people aren't aware of, and or many people aren't discussing. And those nuances fly right next to the sun when you're talking about also DFS lineups.
Mm-hmm.
Taking the stack is one approach, but
Mm-hmm.
also at the same point in time, on a slate that's so small, having your teams be so condensed into one team. Let's say, for example, you were rolling out Josh Allen this past week and you stacked them with Cook and Shakir and Mac Hollins and Keon Coleman. You probably didn't make it. You probably didn't make it unless you pulled a back end Joe Mixon, a back end Brian Robinson, something of that nature. So there really is a lot to talk about and a lot to go over when we think about best ball, and when we think about playoff best ball, and when we think about one of the last milli makers, close to the last milli maker of the season coming up this week on DraftKings.
Yeah, and we all know how you love going after that money for the million makers. There's no way around that.
I love trying out for the milli maker, Joe. I think we should build one today, actually. Not necessarily. We could just talk about who we like, who we don't like this week. I think will be a nice segment to kind of get us to see where the potential is for our lineups to proceed when we're talking about our best ball lineups, because we do have a lot left. We have a bunch still live on DraftKings,
Mm-hmm.
a bunch still live on Underdog, and with it being so competitive here, we're really going to see a lot of interesting lineup. And I think for us, we do want to see Washington advance because we do have a lot of stock in Washington. But I think a lot of the player pool right now also does have a lot of stock in it. And
Oh, it has to. Jalen Daniels and Saquon Barkley are the two fantasy MVPs right now. I mean, they're who moved on. What the best hope is, there was a lot of Detroit people getting pulled through the last round, so you're playing against zeros. I mean, That's part of what happens
Yeah.
with this. You know, you
Yeah,
get
that's
this.
what I was saying because
Same with Baltimore too, quite frankly.
on DraftKings, Amon-Ra was the #1 wide receiver this week. Gibbs was the second rated or the second scoring running back this week. J-Mo had 14 points, and then Goff didn't really do much as we suspected. But if you had, like, let's say Lamar Gibbs, which is a build that you could have had, you most likely advanced with that lineup, and you're dead. And that's what happens at this stage, though, Joe. That's definitely what happens at this stage. You're building teams that you thought were going to make the Super Bowl. And for the most part, there were a lot of people out there that did think that Detroit was going to make the Super Bowl, did think that Baltimore was going to make the Super Bowl, us included.
Hey, I called Detroit was losing this game for a long time. I said the winner of that Tampa-Detroit game or the winner of that Tampa-Washington game was going to be NFC Championship, and here we are. We have a lot of teams that were half Bucks, half Washington, all Baltimore or all Chiefs, and they're still alive. So, I mean, this is the benefit for this format of doing 3-team stacks instead of 2 all-in stacks. If you did a 2 all-in stack, even if you won last week, Lamar carries you at the quarterback spot, and then you have the rest of the Lions. All right, well, you're done. This is, like I said, the 3-team stack, it helps, especially with a team like Washington that really kind of just goes all in really on 2 players, but now with De'Ami Brown starting to step up,
Joe,
he's been a nice steal.
What's going to be really unique about this upcoming week, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these games shake down, because there is a high probability that and this goes to based on those statistics that we were talking about, there is a really high probability that let's say that the Eagles win, but it's a low scoring game, which nobody really thinks that's going to happen, but let's say Eagles win. Let's just say Eagles win, it's a low scoring game. Even if you have the Eagles players, you most likely will not advance in a low-scoring matchup insofar as that could be a storyline, right? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying thinking of the potential that if you have an Eagles stack and the Eagles end up making the Super Bowl, there is a universe in which that if it is a low-scoring game and you and you have Eagles, you're not making it through to the next round because of what's going to happen on the other side of the ball with those Buffalo, Kansas City, and vice versa. The same thing could happen on the other side. And so I'm just really curious when we get to this final round to look at the advance rates for these quarterbacks, particularly because when we look at Kansas City, you aren't being carried through by anybody on Kansas City other than Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, okay? Buffalo, same scenario. Shakir is about like a good 12, 15 points every week. The rest of those wide receivers, hit or miss, you don't know what's going to happen. Cook, okay, didn't do great this week. And then Josh Allen. So there's a lot of uncertainty on the other side of the ball about where those plays are going to go. I mean, you saw this week, Hollywood and Hopkins both zeroed out. And so if you stack the Chiefs and, we carried through Hopkins on a couple of lineups that we had, same with Hollywood Brown. But, as we said this past week, the tight end was a vital position this week. We didn't get Mark Andrews through, unfortunately. But
Kelsey did. We did a lot of drafts where we stashed
Kelsey, Laporta. And even Higbee threw some wrenches into people's lineups. I mean, you're going to see, like I said, you're going to see a lot of Rams players move through because Nakua had a good enough game. He had about 17 points. You had Higbee having the second best tight end week. And so if you had the second best tight end week, you had Kyron having, I believe, like the 4th running back week. And you had Matt Stafford having the second best quarterback week. You're probably going to see a lot of Rams moving through. Now, the question is, will those Rams have carried your Buffalo? Will those Rams have carried your
It's having a lot of Rams builds.
That's the question.
The Baltimore Rams combos did not overcome the Saquon murder. Oh, but that being said, let's do a Millie Maker here, Bob, as you love doing them.
I do.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I think it's just let's go to the defense first because I just want to say something really quickly about this, and I just want to get it out into the ether. When we're looking at defenses, it is always something that, it's tempting to take the most expensive defense. It's tempting every week to take a defense that's playing in a cold environment or, wind, rain, snow, sleet. But one of the things and one of the important things to mention is that this game is really built around turnovers, sacks, defensive touchdowns.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're looking at it, there are going to be opportunities for your sacks. And again, sacks are only, I believe, 1 point apiece. So you get 8 sacks, it's only 8 points. So where the money really is in the defense is where do you believe the turnovers are going to come from? Because interceptions and fumble recoveries are 2 apiece. Your pick 6 is worth 6, of course. Holding a team to 0 is worth 10 points. Everything after that, a little bit different. So, looking at this week, there's a lot of strong offenses on the market right now. And we're going to try to leverage that out. And one of the things that I just want to mention here is that I think that the top 3 defenses here, while they're all worth owning, you are most likely going to run across a lot of teams in the Millie Maker this week that are rolling out the Commanders because it buys you time to buy into something else. But I really do think, and it's something to potentially leverage. We'll see what the numbers look like, ownership wise later in the week. Although I want to really roll out the Commanders because Jalen Hurts is susceptible to a turnover or 2, I think this week for only about 200 more, I think I'm really, really good on the Bills. And there's a couple reasons why I'm good on the Bills. Number one, we're seeing from Patrick Mahomes is doing just enough to win these games.
Oh, yeah.
Just enough. And in most markets, the over and under in this game, I believe this over and under is sitting pretty high as well as the other one. So you're not really getting any super leverage from that market thinking about where you're going from. But what I'm really interested in here from the Bills is the potential in this matchup for a shootout. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if it does, and KC has to wiggle their way down the stretch into a game where they're trying to come back against Josh Allen, or Josh Allen's going to come back against Kansas City, there's going to be a decent play here for field position, and there's going to be a decent look for in the sack markets and things like that. I think defense right here, I think the Bills are a leverage point. While I don't think they're going to be the highest scoring defense this week out of the grouping, I think it is a good leverage play because I feel like a lot of people and I know a lot of people are going to roll out the Commanders because they're so cheap. But when we look at the rest of this player pool, you're going to find out that you don't necessarily have to build the Commanders to get a great lineup. And the other thing too is,
they're not that much tangibly different. Is the big thing. It's only a couple of bucks.
And this is a 2-game slate. And I think it's important when we look at a 2-game slate, you have to get your leverage where you can get it at, because there's going to be a lot of people building the same exact lineups that you, and they're duping it to high heaven. They're throwing the 150 in and they're doing what they can. Just as a note for the Bills here, last week, an interception, 2 defensive fumble recoveries, 2 sacks. The week before, 2 sacks. The week before that, a fumble recovery and a sack. So, it's nothing crazy. But again, the Commanders, it's nothing crazy for them either. Outside of that Detroit game, because Detroit was playing catch up most of that game, they hadn't scored over 10 points in a long time either. So, I don't want to take Philly. I don't want to take the Chiefs, because even though the Eagles would probably be a really good play, they are the most expensive play. And we'll see if we can fit them in a little bit later down the line. So let's go to running back next. Because I think it's unequivocal that every single Millie Maker lineup, or 75% to 95% are going to have Saquon Barkley in it. And you have to eat the chalk. You really, honestly, when you look at what Saquon Barkley could provide you in a matchup against the Commanders' run defense, you're looking at a ceiling of 45 points.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at a floor of approximately 20 points. So you're looking at his salary at 8,600. And when you think about the variables that you're going to be looking for, and you're saying, well, where is the pathway for him to 4x, 5x his salary? It's very easy. You saw Jahmyr Gibbs do it last week. You saw Saquon Barkley do it last week as well. So, when we think about what are the Commanders going to do in this matchup, well, they're going to try to stop Saquon Barkley. What have they had to try to do in the last two matchups? Try to stop Saquon Barkley. What were they not successful in? Stopping Saquon Barkley. Joe, pull up Saquon's stats there and just as a, go to the game log and take a look at those Commanders games. Okay. Week 16, 30 points.
Mm-hmm.
Week 11, 36 points. All right. I mean, you can't, I don't think it would be prudent. And I know we just talked about leverage in terms of the defense, so I'm trying to get it where I can get it at. I don't think it would be prudent whatsoever to not have Saquon Barkley in your Millie Maker lineup this week.
I'm cool with that.
So, building off of that, let's go over to the quarterback market. So the quarterback market is super unique this week because we've got Patrick Mahomes sitting at 6,000, Josh Allen sitting at 7,500. And I'm going to tell you this right now. There is not a lot of need or necessarily to save a lot of salary this week. But a lot of people are going to throw out Patrick Mahomes in their lineups. The last time Mahomes played Buffalo, week 11, he scored 17 points. The goal here, though, is to have a quarterback that's capable in a matchup of scoring 25 plus. The quarterbacks that score 25 plus, 28 plus in your DraftKings lineups are the guys that you want on your roster. So while Patrick Mahomes is cheap, the likelihood that he ends up going for 28 when he's only done that 2 times this year against Buffalo Bills in the playoffs, I'm not sure that happens. The pathway for that to happen is he's going to need to get 3 touchdowns and 300 yards passing. So if you think of this as a narrative game, will the Chiefs be behind? Potentially. If they're behind, who's going to get the ball? Well, they don't have a running game. It's Patrick Mahomes. So if you believe that the Chiefs are going to be behind at any one market, Patrick Mahomes could be the best quarterback this week at the salary that he's at. Because 4 touchdowns is probably what they're going to need to beat the Bills. And knowing that their running game, unless they get down to like the 10, 12, 6-yard line somewhere in there, that's when they could punch it in. But Mahomes is going to have to throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns and get over 300 yards passing in order to be the top quarterback this week. If he does it at that salary, perfect. But a lot of people are going to be on him. I'm going to show you why, Joe.
I got you.
I'm going to show you why. We'll build this lineup, and then we'll go and we'll take a couple pieces out and reconfigure it so you can see a couple of the markets here. But I think in addition to that, you're going to see a lot of people when the projections come out and the ownership projections come out, you're going to see an equally large amount of people on Jaden Daniels. For the last, outside of week 18, where he only played a little bit, since week 13, he's actually before that. I mean, since week 12, he has almost consistently been one of the highest scoring quarterbacks. Hey, Austin, how's it going, man? He has been one of the highest scoring quarterbacks in fantasy football, and his salary has not deviated much, even knowing that he's capable of putting up 30 plus points. the everybody out there is going to want to have Jane Daniels in their lineup at 7,000. They're going to want to have have Patrick Mahomes at 6,000. Thinking about the narratives and the script that these games could provide. Daniels in a comeback game against the Eagles. Maybe they're not even losing that game. Maybe they are winning it outright the entire time. But we're looking at two quarterbacks with two running games that are very, very poor. Okay. You have Jaden Daniels with Washington's run game, not great. Patrick Mahomes with Kansas City's run game, not great either. Austin, we talked about this at the
standard is the standard, baby.
The standard is the standard. Living in Pittsburgh, listening to Mike Tomlin, it's unequivocally disappointing going in there and saying, Mark Andrews hasn't fumbled the ball since 2019, and he has a fumble and a drop when it matters the most. I mean, one of the most consistent tight ends of our generation, just blowing it, like completely and utterly blowing it. But with Daniels here, being a beast, Daniels is one of those plays that when you look at the market right now, when you're building your Millie Maker lineup, or any lineup really, those are going to be the plays that most people are going to be on. They're going to be on Daniels. They're going to be on Mahomes because the script favors it in a comeback game. We like Washington Bills. We like Washington Bills here as well. We do, we have a lot of stock in Kansas City as well.
More stock in Kansas City for our best balls, but our hearts are in Buffalo.
Yeah, and it is very likely.
Oh, Austin, that's 100%. Likely has been set up to be Andrew's replacement for a little bit here. We'll dive into the questions here to get back in the best ball in a minute. But to Austin's point here, likely, I don't know if he's necessarily Andrew's true replacement because Andrew will still be around. But when you see that likely is their number 3 receiver by pretty leaps and bounds, although Bateman did take a step forward, it's interesting what Baltimore's going to do in their skilled departments because they have likely under contract, and he's going to be there. So,
and Joe, when we were
they're not becoming San Francisco, where you need to own all 5 of them.
We were talking last week about this as well. When we were talking about tight ends will be the most important position to own this week in our matchups. Mm-hmm. And you're going to see a lot of teams that have pushed through Isaiah Likely as well. Isaiah Likely will have helped teams that built a Dalton Kincaid stack. If they went Buffalo you're
going to see it in DraftKings, not an underdog. That's the difference between requiring the tight end.
Likely had 17 DraftKings points. I mean, he was the 3rd highest scoring tight end, I think, next to Sam Laporta at the 4th spot. But I think where we get leverage here at is either in Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. And Jalen Hurts is one of those players that when you click on his stats, he doesn't fit the profile of getting you that 25, 30-point market because of Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley has been running wild. Jalen Hurts hasn't needed to do much.
Nope.
But what I will say, though, is during these matchups that they've played one another, it's pretty reliable, other than when he got hurt. Jalen Hurts is pretty reliable enough to at least fit you into that 18, 20-point category. Smoky. I'd be willing to throw a couple bucks on it. I'd be willing to throw 20 on that, I think.
Here's the thing. I think Washington's going to be in the game. And then at that point, you're looking at from it being to a 1 in 8 chance to a 1 in 4 chance, which obviously 16,000 is nowhere near a 1 in 4 chance payout. That's a much, much better odds. I do think that if Washington gets there, Washington wins it. I do think that. I just am not confident in winning in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. It's just, I think Baltimore could have because of Lamar's weirdness effect. Mm-hmm. But as physical as a runner as Josh Allen is, he's not necessarily unique or different. He's just powerful. And powerful, you can stop schematically.
Mhm.
You just got to hope you make the tackles. You can't stop the acceleration schematically, which is why Saquon and Lamar are crazy. So to that point, I don't think Bills are going to be in it, but at the value, I get it. Smokey, I also like Washington beating the Chiefs. I know that's not going to give you as much juice, but I like. I imagine if you had Washington over the Chiefs preseason, it'd been the highest you could. It was the max.
That'd have been wild.
No one was on board. Well, I mean, there's arguments of Washington being a top 5 pick this year.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
There was. So there's a lot of points here, Joe. I just talked about where your leverage could be at in these big names.
See, I still think it's in Daniels. I think Daniels will either be the highest or second highest at the price tag I want them.
So there's a lot of leverage that you could probably pull out of Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, but when you're thinking of game script and how those two quarterbacks play, because statistically speaking, they were very similar this past week against very, similar-ish defenses. Rushing touchdown, rushing yards, and then, no passing touchdowns, no interceptions. They did not crack 200 yards passing. So, as it goes, when you look at what your game scripts can look like, even though Jaden Daniels is most likely going to be the chalk this week, I think you have to eat the chalk on Saquon and you have to eat the chalk on Jaden Daniels. So let's throw Jaden Daniels in the lineup, because there's a narrative that you could write that Philadelphia will get out to a lead because of Saquon Barkley, and that Washington will have to come back with Jaden Daniels because their run game isn't as prolific.
There's also an argument that Jalen Daniels just wants to score 7 touchdowns because that's how you guarantee the win.
He scored 5 the last time they played. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. The only thing that kind of puts me off a little bit from Jaden Daniels, not only with the chalk, is that this is now the third meeting. And you got to ask yourself, is the defense of Philadelphia prepared to face him for a third time? And I think the answer to that would be yes. So if you played this lineup, you could probably get leverage off of Jaden Daniels by stacking it with Philadelphia Eagles defense, because even if Jaden Daniels goes and tries to throw the ball for like 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, he's going to get picked off a couple times.
I think Hurts more likely to get picked off than Daniels.
And that's fair. And that's kind of where the leverage is at for Washington Commanders defense as well. So just some talking points to think about as we build this lineup. Trying to keep the chalk where it needs to be at, and then varying at different positions here. So I think where we're going to get a lot of variance this week is in this wide receiver market. So let's go over to the wide receivers. I think there's going to be
they're all cheap.
A really good that's what I'm saying. You don't have to underspend on certain positions. But at the same time, there are going to be thousands of other people building certain lineups just like us. And we're going to have to figure out where that leverage spot is going to be at. And I think
you got to put Scary Terry in this lineup.
If so, it is possible that you could build a similar lineup as you did last week with McLaurin and Diami Brown. It is very, very possible that you can do the same thing this week.
All right. I love that.
But
you have your classic 3-to-1 stack already built.
Knowing that they were one of the highest scoring duos last week, there are going to be a lot of people and a lot of optimizers and a lot of things throwing this same lineup at you. So if you are rolling Daniels, Barkley, McLaurin, and Diami,
I'm not worried about everyone else. I'm just worried about what's going to give me the most.
Listen, this is probably going to be the chalk minus the Bills defense. So if you are rolling with this chalk, then we have to discuss what is going to be the playmaker that puts us over the top.
I think it's Worthy.
Who is going to be the playmaker that puts us over the top?
Because Worthy can give you explosion, and he has the speed element that could do it. He also give you a 0. So good Diami.
Absolutely. I mean, they all can. They all can. And I just want to kind of talk from yesterday or from this past week. when you look at where the Millie Maker was at this past week, Xavier Worthy was one of the highest owned wide receivers in the Millie Maker. You had where is he at? I want to look at Worthy. Where's my one lineup with Worthy on it here? Worthy was one of the highest owned players. He was on. Let me scroll up to the top here. 1 minute. All right. So on the lineups here, the top winning lineup, Daniels was owned at 22%, Barkley at 41, Gibbs at 53, Shakir at 28, Amon-Ra at 30, Diami at 15. McLaurin was 45% owned because of all those Jaden Daniels stacks. And Worthy was 32% owned last week.
Yeah, and I guess the point is, Bob, is with there being only 2 games, you can't worry about chalk. It's just got to be all who's got the best setup. And
you can. Why I'm saying this, Joe, is that you can worry about chalk, but what I said earlier is true. You bite it and eat it in the right places and find your leverage on other markets. So this is why I'm saying maybe not Worthy. Took
him off the bus.
Patrick Mahomes is the cheapest quarterback. When you have the cheapest quarterback, there is a very good chance that the cheapest quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, paired with Saquon Barkley, that lineup is going to be one of the most duped lineups to go with Kelsey and Xavier Worthy. They're going to want to take the top option from Kansas City as well. So you have a very good statistical chance that at least say Mahomes comes in at 23% owned at the end of the day. If he's 23 or 25% owned or 30% owned, say he's 30% owned, that means that Worthy is also 30% owned. And if you want to buy Kelsey, you can't eat it with Worthy as well because you have 30% less chance of winning. So that's why I say Worthy probably isn't the dupe that you want because you do want Kelsey. Which, we already put Kelsey in the line. So, so we got to find leverage in other places, especially off of Jaden Daniels, because this is the same discussion to be had about Terry McLaurin and Diami Brown too, Joe, is that if Jaden Daniels is, let's say, 28% owned, then that also means that Terry McLaurin and Diami have a high ownership too, because if somebody's leveraging Hurts, so let's say somebody picks Hurts, the best player from Washington is obviously Terry McLaurin. So Terry McLaurin is going to go through the roof as well. He's probably going to have ownership close to like 50%, like 52%, because we're either eating the Jane Daniels and the Hurts. So if you're building that lineup, you're obviously going to have Terry McLaurin in it, no questions asked. It's over with. So, what makes me really curious though, is number one, how many people are going to, so obviously the Jalen Hurts stack is definitely going to have the Saquon in it as well, but it really depends on how much money they have as to what Philadelphia wide receiver they might want to go after. If you're stacking Jaden Daniels with McLaurin and Diami, like we just did here, there's a good chance that the only Philadelphia player from the other side is going to be Saquon Barkley. Saquon's going to have probably like 60% ownership, 70% ownership in the Millie Maker this week. So, we've already built that stack, and I don't think that we can build in any more Philly or Washington players in that stack. There's a lot happening. And the likelihood that both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith have a good game is really low. The likelihood that Jahan Dotson has a great game is also really low. So, leveraging it at that point, I think, is really a really good decision. So now where the market lies is, where in the wide receiver room do we want to go, and where can we build from a position of, okay, not many people are going to build this person as part of a stack, but they still have the chance to be successful. I'm going to throw a name out there. It's going to be one that you like, but is not necessarily one that people are going to like after last week's performance. But Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown is sitting here at 4,200.
Mm-hmm.
He just burned every single Patrick Mahomes owner out there this past week.
Sure did.
He also is one of the players that it's the third most expensive, or it's the third least expensive chief player there, averaging outside of last week, getting about 6 points and 8 points in the last couple of games that they played. Looking at this slate, Joe, outside of Terry McLaurin and maybe AJ Brown, there's not another wide receiver on this slate that feels capable of scoring 20 plus DraftKings points.
Yeah.
So having and eating an 8 points max could be beneficial. And it feels like in a script where, Mahomes is going to have to play all out, he's probably going to have to pass it to more than Travis Kelce. So my inkling for this is to go after a guy like Hollywood Brown. Also, looking at the Buffalo wide receivers, people have been burned time and time again by Keon Coleman. The metrics on Keon Coleman in terms of this matchup, not necessarily the best. But we look at a guy like, and this is why I'm saying you don't have to go this route, but you look at a guy like Mac Hollins, who is not great by any stretch of the imagination. But
it's not.
Will that be the piece that the Josh Allen owner doesn't build? Because the Josh Allen owner is most likely going to be either throwing a naked Josh Allen out there, which means that you're not stacking him with anybody, or he's pairing him with maybe Cooper or maybe Kincaid or maybe the Buffalo defense. So not a lot of these Buffalo wide receivers are going to be owned. And that includes in a stack. So maybe you get your leverage. If you're building this stack that we have right here, maybe that leverage is going to come from just taking a Buffalo wide receiver in that 3,000 to 4,000 range and hoping that they pop off for 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a strategy this week, because I just don't think you're going to get there. And if you are going to get there with that lineup that we were saying, has all the high profile guys, then at least 500 other people are going to have built that lineup as well.
Yeah.
So you're sharing that prize pool, which is still nice, but it's not what you want. So we have 5,100 to spend on two guys left. We have a running back and a flex.
Mm-hmm.
Now, two ways we can go about thinking about this, Joe. At the beginning of the season, one of the things that we noted is that oftentimes in best ball formats, it ends up that the running back ends up in the flex position.
Mm-hmm.
This year on DFS, it has felt like more times than not that people have won it with a tight end at the flex position. The reason with the tight end is that the tight ends are cheaper, and if they hit, their floors are so low, but their ceilings put you in a really kind of safe point territory, right? So if you're looking
but what's the point of going cheap? I don't want Cook, AJ Brown, Devontae. I mean, and once we get below Pacheco, they're all built into the opposite price point.
And that's my argument for Josh Allen. Okay, is that you really don't need to save the salary to go into.
I want Jane Daniels is going to outscore Josh Allen.
But I'm saying the market is aligning that there are going to be a super big amount of duped lineups, and we want to get it where the difference can be. Okay, so I want to look at the running backs for a moment, and I want to kind of just go over what I see. James Cook is a good name. However, one of the problems with James Cook is that his variance is so the gap is so big.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me. He can either get you, pull up his stats there. He can either get you about 8 or 30. Okay. And a wide range, if you scroll through his stats for the season, a wide range in between. Typically speaking, if they're leading, it's because he has more than one touchdown. And that's something that's a market that's really interesting. The Denver game was one of those games. The Denver and New England game were really interesting to me, as well as the Detroit game. Again, that was a shootout game. If he's eclipsing 100 yards, you can very easily see that minus that Detroit game, that they pretty much had that game handled. If he's eclipsing 100 yards and getting a touchdown. I'm not sure that that's the pathway this week. And if it is, a lot of people who have saved salary on, say, Patrick Mahomes, the safest run back is James Cook. So if you're running a Patrick Mahomes lineup at the cheapest quarterback cost, you can afford James Cook and you're playing James Cook. So we got to be a little bit different there. B-Rob.
See, my answer for difference and value is Robinson.
Well, I'm going to get to that right now. B-Rob is one of those players, similar to Cook, is very much a touchdown-dependent runner. Not averaging, they're basically almost the same in terms of usage and in terms of fantasy output. Is that if Washington is humming, then B-Rob is going to be successful. We saw this a little bit with Kyron this past week. And it's funny because both Cook and Robinson run up against the two best run defenses on the year. So it's an interesting market to be in. Coming down, then you look at the pairing for the Kansas City running backs, and you're like, okay, well, Hunt, Pacheco, it is what it is. It might be that 11 points wins you that running back 2 spot this week. It doesn't feel like a lot of players on this slate are going to be a game-breaking slate outside of Saquon Barkley. And when I look at Kareem Hunt's potential in this matchup, it's low. But he is, out of all the Chiefs outside of Travis Kelce, he's the most likely to score a touchdown. Okay. So if the Chiefs are going to be successful, it seems to me that it could come with Hunt. But again, all 3 of those running backs, Joe, are profiled very similarly in terms of game script usage. And James Cook has the highest ceiling out of that grouping of players. But if you are rolling, because Patrick Mahomes is going to be highly owned, if you're rolling Patrick Mahomes, your run back is James Cook. Hoping for a shootout. We get down to these Kenny Gainwells, Ty Johnsons, Ray Davis, P. Ryan, Steele, Keontae Ingram, Gillen, Frank Gore. Everybody below 4,200, you don't even need to have on your radar. Those are not the guys that are going to make a difference this week at all. You might say, oh, well, Jeremy McNichols scored a touchdown this past week. Garbage time. There's most likely not going to be garbage time this week against Philadelphia. You say, well, Chris Rodriguez has had, a decent game here or there. No, you don't need to save that much salary. And those guys are most likely not going to be the players that really, tear it up for you. Then it comes down to, Ray Davis scored a touchdown this week. And Bob, you just said, well, maybe 11 points at running back 2 clears you. Yeah, maybe it does. And maybe it is Ray Davis. That's the answer to what you want. But again, the Chiefs have been a stellar rush defense. They've been very good. The last time Buffalo played the Chiefs, James Cook went for 19 points, but he did it on 9 carries. And he had 20 yards. So, you're looking at it saying, well, that's not that great. And he had 5 receptions. So there's a market on DraftKings, instead of on Underdog, where you're looking at the reception totals and saying, well, that might be what makes the difference this week. And that's kind of the discussion to lead into potentially targeting a guy like Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, although he doesn't get a large amount of running attempts, he does, or at least last week, outside of the Tampa Bay game, he has dominated the reception total. Kareem Hunt doesn't catch the ball. Okay. He's not targeted that much. He doesn't catch the ball. And that's what Buffalo is weak against. You look at Pacheco. Pacheco's not catching the ball. They're not throwing them the ball. So, out of all these players, Pacheco has the best chance to kind of like rebound, but not worth owning at the price point, not worth owning. So, in my estimation here, it feels like in a lineup that has Jane Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and Diami Brown, if you're really thinking that they're going to have a great game, either Eckler or Robinson would probably be the way to go and to get leverage on a couple other people.
And it's probably Eckler because of the pass catching. Because it's on DraftKings.
And there's most likely going to be a lot of people in there on Austin Eckler because he's 5,300.
So this is your slate left for your flex. Hopkins, Gainwell, Gogurt, Ty Johnson, Ray Davis, Ertz, P. Ryan, and that's basically it.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the discussions that we always have to have. In a regular weekly fantasy, you don't really want to roster double tight ends and all that stuff. But there's a discussion to be had here that owning one of the two tight ends from the Washington Philly game would be an interesting point.
42 stacks are successful in these small matchups.
Again, also, the question to ask yourself here when we're looking at this flex position and seeing, okay, well, where are we going to get leverage at on some other people, and where is it that that we're actually going to get points from? And Ty Johnson and Ray Davis are so variable in terms of their outputs. If one of them is to go off, they're probably going to be the person that is the one you needed to own in order to have won this millie this week. The safer options and very intriguing options in terms of this build is your tight ends, your Goddard and your Zach Ertz. These are the guys that if anybody from this grouping of players from 4,600 or below is going to score a touchdown, you have to ask yourself, well, would I rather put that touchdown equity into Ertz or Goddard, or would I hope it's going to be Amari Cooper or Ray Davis?
See, I'd rather go in Goddard because then it also slams those who invested in the heavy receivers from Philly.
Absolutely. There's definitely a leverage position there on the A.J. Browns and the Devonta Smiths of the world. So when you build this out, if you take Goddard in there, you still have 400 left. So looking at what's available, you could go up from the Bills D to go into the Chiefs D if you like the way.
Which I think you should. You don't have any Bills offensive players. It sticks with that game narrative.
You're also only $100 behind to get Josh Allen if you wanted to trade out Jaden Daniels. There's lots of different pathways here for success. You could go, like I said, if you go with the Chiefs, you still have $200. If you wanted to change anybody else, you could. And you can also roll with the Eagles, Joe. The Eagles, building an Eagles stack.
You can't put that many Washington offensive players in there and then take the Eagles defense. It just won't work.
That's where the leverage is, Joe. Okay.
It doesn't matter what leverage or not. There's not a game script in the world where you can win that way. You can win a game script this way.
There is.
There's no way to have that many Washington offensive players and take the defense against them.
So, Joe, I just want to let you know, the last time they played Washington and Jane Daniels scored 36 points, Eagles still had 7 fantasy points.
Yeah, the Chiefs should be able to beat that. Is my point.
So the question is the question when it comes to these defensive markets is that, which of those defenses, and that's where that's why I wanted to start on the defenses, because I think
defense is most likely going to start the turnover.
Exactly.
It's one of the red ones. Yes, they are.
Family.
Yes, they are, family.
You saw it here first. All those commander stacks that we were building.
Been doing them for 3 weeks.
Making sure we had Jaden Daniels on a lot of teams. We know we did get sniped on a bunch, but making sure Jaden Daniels was built on the teams. Unfortunately, if he was paired with the Ravens, that sucked because the Ravens lost. But when he was paired with Buffalo or Eagles or anything like that, it has worked out for us. So, we're really happy. We're really, really happy about that. So, this is just an example of one lineup that you could build that will potentially give you some opportunities to win the Millie. Again, with this is probably going to be the last ish. They're probably going to have one for the Super Bowl. That's going to be more of a showdown. But when we look at this 2-game slate, there's lots of ways to gain leverage. There's lots of ways to pivot. There's lots of way to move through here.
Yeah, we know the Buffalo happier people with that. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of our fantasy market, yeah, it sucked. But, we're as Steelers fans, it's always
nice. As soon as they stop giving the ball to Henry, they deserve to lose. Family, that happened to me. As soon as Henry wasn't going to come even close to matching Gibbs or Saquon, I wanted them to lose. And I actively changed in that moment. So that being said, we have a lot of Chiefs build up, or a lot of Kansas City, Washington builds together. Those are really the value of where we're at here moving forward. And we're excited for it. So we're not going to be able to do a whole lot more episodes this week as we go forward here, mostly because there's not a whole lot of other fantasy things to talk about here. We just broke down the $1 Million Maker lineup for it. We can keep doing autopsies of what has happened, but the reality is that there's not a whole lot of, aside from digging deeper in terms of the teams, value. Bob has already gone through the players that are going to be able to dominate the opposing defenses based upon matchups. You just saw a lot of them here in our respective lineups, and that's kind of where we're at. So we're not going to have a ton of week during the Super Bowl week either, but once we get on the other side of the NFL draft, we're going to be with you hot regularly. There's no doubt about that.
Come on, what are you, Joe? Crazy. But yeah, I mean, the fact that you look at ESPN, you look at the talking heads that are on ESPN, and these talking heads agree that why the fact that you pulled it out of Derrick Henry's hands when you went, like, the fact that really bothered me about that game isn't the fact that Mark Andrews fumbled the ball. It's not the fact that he dropped it for the 2-point conversion. It's the fact that you went out this year knowing that your weakest part of your offense was your run game consistently.
You're running back, yeah.
And when it mattered the most, you stopped giving it to the guy that you just.
It's the common thread of all their losses. They didn't give the ball to Henry enough, and they lost. That it's literally every single one of their losses was they could have won had they given Henry the rock more, and they just refused to do it. It's just on them.
It really was maddening to watch that, because you're like, wait a minute, Henry gets better as the game goes on. Well, it seems like he just needs more carries, and the fact that you don't just run it in, it really is. I mean, you look at when Pete Carroll did that, and you're like, okay, well, why didn't he give the ball to Marshawn Lynch?
Because 2 chances is better than 1.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, this week was definitely one for the record books.
Marshawn Lynch is more acceptable than the Henry. Now, that being said, Andrews is wide open, and if he doesn't slip, and he probably catches that ball. The other point to be known here is if they don't go for 2 the first time and miss it, they don't go for 2 at all. But the bigger part of all of this, just like when Baltimore lost in week 1 on a 2-point conversion to Kansas City, they still were going to lose that game. Josh Allen had that ball with 90 seconds left and 2 timeouts. Josh Allen was going to come down and hit a field goal. I mean, Baltimore was losing that game regardless.
I mean, there was a
dropping conversion.
There was a very likely chance that would have happened. But again, Joe, like you said, if they would not have gone for the 2-point conversion early in that game and would have just settled for the extra point, none of that would have had to have happened. I mean, they played a game that they could have won, and they didn't. And what are you going to do if you're the Ravens going into next season? Well, I think it's very, very obvious what the Ravens have to do in terms of a personnel move. You have to go out and get something happening in that wide receiver room, because if Zay Flowers is going to be, get hurt, or Bateman, or you're just only going to use Bateman in one particular way, you're going to have.
No, they need to get a pass rush first. That's what they're going to have. It's Baltimore. They're going to spend their assets on pass rushers.
Right. You're going to have more pieces for Lamar, especially if Mark Andrews, let's say, falls off at some point in time. Likely is great, but if they're going to be running these heavy sets with Derrick Henry, they're going to need some other pass catching tight ends or something of that nature. But I agree with you, Joe, on terms of the defense. They've got to get a pass rush. I mean, they absolutely have to get a pass rush.
They might go 2 picks there, back to back.
The Washington rookie tight end is a good trade target for when Ertz is gone. Yeah, I mean, Ben Sinnott is a really good option. I mean, you see this year how successful Zach Ertz has been from a fantasy perspective and from just a football perspective with Jaden Daniels. I mean, it's very clear that Jaden Daniels knows exactly how to be an NFL quarterback. Mm-hmm. He doesn't run the ball too much. He does what he needs to do when he needs to do it. He's poised. He looks good in the pocket. He looks good out of the pocket. I mean, you just take everything that Jaden Daniels does. That's exactly what you want a rookie quarterback to do, and none of them can do it.
Yep.
But Jaden Daniels,
Caleb Williams.
Jaden Daniels is special. I mean, and on the news front, Joe, we just saw yesterday that Ben Johnson went to the Chicago Bears, and we'll be one of the first people to tell you it's probably not going to change much in Chicago.
It's not.
Ben Johnson is a great coach, great play caller, but there are 2 pivotal problems, 3, I guess.
Unless they literally overhaul their entire offensive line.
I agree with that, family. If you're going out there and looking for dynasty trades, Ben Sinnott is a good option. Looking at guys that are going to retire or to go off with different teams.
And obviously so is McMillan.
Yeah, I did want to touch on Chicago for a minute here, Joe, because 2 things that they need on the field. They need an offensive line that's capable of keeping Caleb Williams upright. Any coach, I think most coaches can be very successful with a number 1 or number 2 offensive line like Ben Johnson had in Detroit. Chicago doesn't have that. And they also don't have a run game. DeAndre Swift is a shell of what he was at various points in time. He's not good. And you can see that from all of his stats that he threw out this season. So in order for Ben Johnson's trajectory to be relevant on Chicago, they're going to have to get an offensive line in this draft. They're going to have to pay for it on the backside as in free agency or something. Mm-hmm. And they're going to have to go out and get a running game. The other thing is they'll have to stop being Chicago. And by that, I mean, stop wasting money on things that look shiny but aren't. So I think that's something to go through.
So, Allie, I'll go through each of these guys here individually for you. So I think Ayuk's going to bounce back in a big way, given the assumption that Purdy is going to return. I don't think that San Francisco's offense is something we need to worry about. I do think that you're going to see Debo be in a different uniform next year. I do think that helps Ayuk tremendously. Jaden McMillian is going to be
McMillian. I like that name, Jaden McMillian.
Yeah, man, he's going to be a league winner next year. You're going to be able to get him like the 8th round, 10th round, something like that. He's going to drop, and he is going to basically give you what Godwin gave you. He's going to be much better than Godwin Light. Whole season to build around him.
Here's the thing with Godwin, Joe. Godwin's going to get paid.
Godwin's going to get paid somewhere.
There's a team out there that's going to pay him, and there is a really
might stay in the division and just go over to the Bayou. Godwin's getting a check, dude. There's no way around that. I'm not fighting that, but I know he's not getting a check in Tampa.
But it frees up McMillan, which I like a lot.
Yeah, exactly. McMillan's going to be a very good pick. Benson, I'm not quite there yet. Estain, definitely not there yet.
Today, yeah.
So, I mean,
well, here's the thing, guys.
Estain will definitely be on my I don't want on my team list. Benson, I can't get in love with Arizona as long as Kyler Murray's there. Because they are a third quarter 3 and out every drive in the third quarter waiting to happen. Arizona, I don't like running backs from poor franchise. I mean, look overall from where we're talking about good running backs at. Predominantly, it's the good franchises, or at least the ones who know how to build an offensive line. That ain't Arizona. You know, you want to go somewhere that actually will make meaningful. So best. I mean, I definitely don't rely on them. So as I go through there, I think you probably have them ranked in the order that they will be drafted. In terms of Ayuk's trade value, you're going to get him next year. He might be a steal in the 4th. I bet that he drops because
he won't. He won't be. Just an opinion here about Brandon Ayuk. You're not going to be able to sell Brandon Ayuk right now for anything more than probably just a couple of picks. And maybe
I was talking about when you'd have to reacquire him in a redraft league next year.
Yeah, I'm not on the bus as high as Joe is on Brandon Ayuk at this moment in time. Ollie, I think it's relevant that Ayuk is worth keeping if it doesn't cost you a lot. But I will say that I think it's okay to throw Brandon Ayuk back in the pool. So if I am valuing Brandon Ayuk, I think Brandon Ayuk, with the performance that he had this year, getting injured, having Debo probably move out.
Well, she also has Marv. So relatively speaking,
you,
next year, would you rather have Ayuk or Marv? Because I think I'd rather have Ayuk by a lot.
Both are, I don't know, both statistically speaking, in terms of potential output, they both have the same floor and ceiling to me. I don't really see figuring out where Debo's going is really important, and figuring out what Arizona does in order to kind of.
Well, they're not getting a new coach. They just got a new one last year. You're stuck with this again.
What Arizona does to like kind of ease in for James Conner's eventual demise. I'm just really curious what happens there. If I were to keep either of them, I'd probably keep Marv, just because I think that with a whole nother offseason of usage, that he could probably hit a really good ceiling next year. But I'm not confident on either of them. I really don't like either of these wide receivers. And I like Jalen McMillan a lot more.
See, I trust the Niners bounce back more than the Cardinals.
If you've watched our show for a long time, Ollie, you'll know that, McMillan was one of those guys that we were championing in the offseason. He's one of those guys that, we like a lot. And his situation is really, really good. And you can point a lot of holes and say, well, he can't replicate that touchdown production. He can't replicate that touchdown production. But again, Chris Godwin was doing the same thing just during the first 6 weeks of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And, we weren't big Godwin guys because we liked Jalen McMillan. Now, if he gets that full usage over the course of the whole season, I'm not saying that it's going to be Chris Godwin numbers, but if I can get a guy like that in McMillan in the 8th or 9th round, I think out of all the players you listed there, I think he's the most valuable player of the group.
Oh, yeah.
And if you wanted to trade him, you could probably get a better bounty on him plus Estime than you could on Ayuk plus Benson. I think, unfortunately, you're probably.
Oh, no one else is invested.
Nobody is really interested and invested in Arizona Cardinals right now. Nobody's really invested or interested in San Francisco right now, outside of maybe Christian McCaffrey. And I think with McMillan and Estime got a lot of heat earlier in the season, like a lot of hype earlier in the season, and that was
You don't
like
want
going to be the
Estimate.
guy. But I just can't fully trust a Denver running back.
No,
I
you
mean,
can't.
we have not seen a successful Denver running back. It feels, I know this isn't true, but I guess if we were to go back and look, we might find out. I feel like we haven't seen a successful Denver running back since Clinton Portis. So I
Pretty
feel
much.
I feel like it doesn't really benefit you to buy into the Denver running game. And if I were to trade any of the pieces out of this grouping, I would probably trade Estime and see what I could get for him. But I wouldn't probably do that right now. I would wait a little bit and see how that value kind of tapers on as we get through.
Yeah, in
Season.
general, your best time to do trades for dynasty leagues is going to be either right before or right after the NFL draft.
This right here, Joe. People are going to be buying Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, that's because he's
wanting...
Debo's replacement, though. He's not. He's not Ayuk's. Jennings is Ayuk's.
I get that. I get that. But what I want to say is that Pearsall is probably going to be the piece out of those two wide receivers that makes more points next year. And then you got to think to yourself, well, George Kittle's still there. George Kittle is a vital piece of this offense that outside of injury isn't really going away. So I'm not 1,000% sure that I want any piece of Ayuk right now in terms of this year. But I also understand, like family.
Yeah, Ayuk's the one I want because he's the only
one.
No
one's paying for him. So no one's paying for him. Nobody wants him.
Yeah, you're not going to don't sell him. You won't get anything for him. But the reason of all the Niners, Ayuk's the one I'm highest on. If you look at the way that team's constructed,
like
and with McCaffrey probably going to the slot like A-Chain was this year, Ayuk's the one that goes over the top. Kittle's the middle of the field. Parasol's the middle of the field. McCaffrey's the middle of the field. Ayuk's the different one, and the different one is the one who tends to have the better year.
And I guess family, I should restate that in a different way. It's not the fact that people are buying CMC, but out of the players from San Francisco, what we've seen this year, the ones that you really wanted to own at cost would have been Kittle and Mason. Yeah, but CMC is one of those points where most of the people who are kind of in the ether of fantasy football circles, they all will say, "Oh, it's Christian McCaffrey and it's George Kittle." As you dig deeper, it definitely, you definitely want to target Ricky Pearsall, because if he does take that position away from Debo, which is looking like he should, that's going to be a really nice position for Ricky Pearsall to be in. You saw how he performed.
I don't think Debo's going back.
He had like 24 points in one of those weeks. It looked really nice. I mean, after recovering from getting shot, it's beautiful. He looks really good. CMC is Eckler 3 years ago. Prove me wrong.
We can't, because you might be right.
I can't. And family, here's the thing, Joe. If you go back into the annals of our channel, in its infancy, one of the things that Joe said about Austin Eckler is that he's not it. Like there was a time for Eckler, and when that time passes, and one of the things to think about, one of those things to think about with players, and Ollie, we're going to get back up to your team in a moment, is you can wait and wait and wait, like a lot of us did on Tyreek Hill this year. Some of that paid off for some people, some of it didn't. Some people were waiting on CMC. If you bought him at the right price, it's worth it. But right now, there's I don't know, man. Like, CMC is one of those players that I think people are going to be buying, but I don't know how much they're going to be spending on CMC, because in Dynasty, he's old and he's hurt. So they're not going to be spending too much on him. Ricky Pearsall, I think people are going to spend just enough capital to get into, but they're still kind of like, I might want to wade this out. and people are going to be going after and going whole hog for a couple of other players. In terms of what you asked, though, up here, family, I think in terms of the late, if you're giving somebody a late first round pick for McMillan, I think that that's fair enough compensation. If I owned McMillan, I might not take it. But if I had a late first round pick in a rookie draft, I would trade him for Jalen McMillan, because you're looking at guys like, the Penn State tight end Warren. You're looking at potentially Jalen Milroe at 6 overall. The Ohio State running backs from yesterday, as potential options. And do we really think that those guys are going to hit it out of the park?
Yeah, in general, it's better to have the more
6?
established player than the rookie anyway, as a general role. So, yeah, I totally get that.
Absolutely
I'm not.
I couldn't see that. I couldn't see that either. And that's why, I mentioned it, is that, people are going to want a first round pick for CMC in terms of the rookie drafts.
You're not going to get it.
But you're not going to get it. You're most likely with CMC, you're probably going to get a package of, maybe a fourth rounder, maybe third and fourth round, maybe. And most people wouldn't give that up. Especially
hard guy to trade.
Especially looking at, if that means that I get Cam Scatteraboo and Quinn Ewers for CMC, that's not really worth it for most people right now.
Scatteraboo.
I love the name. I love the name. The player.
He's gonna be horrible as a pro.
So Ali, your team here. My team is Jaden Daniels, Puka T, Marv, Ayuk, McMillan, Saquon Gibbs, Dobbins, Benson, Brock Byers. If it were
at this time, I wouldn't do any moves. Like I said, I'm sitting on your team until really any dynasty team. I'm sitting on it till May. Unless you're getting someone who's just doing a stupid trade and you take advantage of them, I would sit on it until May. I want to see where the chips fall.
Mm-hmm.
As we get closer to free agency, we'll have some speculative plays there. But the problem with free agent speculation is that 90% of it is ESPN clickbait and wrong. So you can't really go off of it. So that's why I would say let the dust settle in May. And we are really good at differentiating who the steals and the studs are going to be. And May is when we're going to be able to give you all those answers.
Well, I will say this right now, is that it might be relevant, depending on how your weekly lineup sets in, Ollie, because you have such a strong case at your top 2 wide receivers with McMillan on your back end, that you just took Marv this past year, but if there's any way that you could potentially work your way up and find a way to get into the Ashton Genty lottery, I think that with your team,
you put another running back on that team, you'll win the thing in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it, Dobbins doesn't need to be on your team.
No.
Benson, okay. But
Benson's a lottery pick.
Your assets, if I had to give up McMillan, and giving up McMillan with Ayuk or something like that, plus a pick to move up to the number 1 overall, I would really consider that, if it meant that I would have Ashton Genty on my team. Regardless of how you feel about Genty, he is one of the better running backs coming out this year. And if you could run Saquon, Gibbs, and Genty for the next couple of years, that could pay dividends, realistically speaking. And knowing that your third wide receiver is already volatile, like we said, we love McMillan and his year is coming. But Marvin Ayuk right now are very volatile wide receivers. So you're kind of
listen, given the fact you have Puka and T, I'm okay with trading one of the two of either Marv or Ayuk to get a first round pick. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one it doesn't need 1-1, but if it's top 5, I would absolutely do that. And if I recall earlier, you had 1-1, and I think you traded it away for Puka, if I recall that right from earlier in the year.
I like that.
Anyway, we're getting to the point where we got to run here. Bob, we're not coming back on again this week, are we?
I don't believe so. I believe this is this episode will be the only episode this week. But I like this thought here. moving Dobbins plus some first, maybe some late first, because as we've said before, 2026 doesn't really matter. 2027 right now, you're playing to win now. And so there's a discussion to be had that you can always accumulate those picks back again if you start faltering in the middle of the year by trading some assets away. So if you could, trading the 1-1 for Bowers.
Sorry, it was Bowers, not Puka. Either way, mega win.
Mega win, worth it. But yeah, we'll talk more about this because after this week, we'll be working our way into the Super Bowl. And so there will be a lot of things to talk about. Going all in this year. Hey, going in for Brock Bowers is worth it, man.
Because Bowers is also an investment you get to keep forever.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, crew, we'll see you later. Have a good weekend. And we'll be back next week, hopefully on Monday, 3:45 Eastern.
And hopefully we'll be seeing a red Super Bowl.
Welcome to Local Football Flavor, connecting the fan bases of the NFL.